Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. First, I'd like to apologize before we get too deep into this video. Uh, Apologize for the fact that it's been so long since I've had a Storied Sorties video come out. That has in part to do with my deployment, and since I've been home, just spending more time with my wife and spending time with the family. But we're back. We're here. Getting ready to pump this one out. I'm also gonna go ahead and apologize. A lack of stories. I know the C-130 model kit that I did, I had quite a few actually decent stories to go along with it. I don't have that this time around so far. I'm gonna keep searching for the future videos involving the Sherman EZ8 tank that I'm putting together here by Tamiya, but so far I'm not having a lot of luck. So this episode we're gonna kind of recap like this history behind the EZ8 and its production and some few quotes from famous people in history. So without further ado, we're gonna actually go ahead and get into this. And but feel free that if you guys think of any stories or anything you want to hear me talk about that involve the EZ8 Sherman, by all means, comment down below. Let me know. Maybe there's some things I'm not aware of. I don't, like I said, I'm not running into particular stories about the EZ8 because there's so many variants of Shermans used throughout the war. So every time there's an engagement, they just talk about the armored divisions and that they had Shermans. Very rarely do they specifically mention what type of Sherman was used in the engagements from what I've been able to see. The one famous story I can think of that involved the Sherman, and it was definitely not an EZ8, was with Audie Murphy using getting on the back of the tank while it was on fire. And if I remember correctly, he was wounded using the 50 cal to cover the retreat of his unit while holding off some Germans. I think it was in Italy. So that's like the only, right now for me, story that comes to actual mind involving a Sherman. But again, I don't even remember the variant because there's so many different versions of the M4 Sherman. First thing I'm going to talk about is more background of the EZ8 specifically from a website called tanksencyclopedia.com. And as always, I'll have a link in the description for all these articles and things that I'm using as references for you guys to be able to read. Because this website has some pretty good, interesting information about the development of the M4 Sherman and the different versions that were created. One thing they talk about on the site is the actual design and development behind the EZ8 was actually designed after British specs, which I actually did not know. I thought this was strictly an American design. I mean, it is still an American design, but they went after British specs instead of American specs. And the British local name for them was the Sherman AY. These were in production from March 1944 to April 1945. The specs behind this is specifically the engine. They said that the EZ8 had a Ford V8 500 horsepower engine put into it, which gave it a range of 100 miles and a top speed of 29.2 miles per hour. They would consume 201.94 gallons of fuel in that 100-mile span, which was, think about your cars doing that today, especially with the price of gases. It'd be ridiculous. You guys would be broke within a week, honestly. And they obviously saw action in the latest phases of the conflict of the European War, and like from Battle of Bulge all the way through the surrender of Germany, and then in the Pacific as well. They were used long after that in Korea and Vietnam. And it was also used in many foreign armies. The U.S. was not the only one that used that, but we kind of discussed that as about the Shermans as a whole. They were not limited to just the American standard issue. As we often do, we outsource a lot of our weapons and armament out to other countries that we most often claim are allies, but end up not really being allies and biting us in the back side here and there throughout history. One of the things they mentioned on this website about the EZ8 is that General Patton himself summarized that in mechanical endurance and ease of maintenance on our tanks. Well, I guess this wasn't really just about the EZ8. It was just about American tanks in general. But Patton often had a high regard for a lot of the stuff that the American military used. He spoke very highly of the M1 Garand, and obviously he's going to think very highly of his tanks because they're his tanks and he uses them, and he boasts beating Rommel and being one of the best tank commanders that the Allies ever saw, often butting heads with Montgomery. But he was boasting about our tanks, he says, like I said before, in mechanical endurance and ease of maintenance of our tanks are infinitely superior to any other. He was not talking just about our Allied tanks, but obviously the German tanks. And the article on this website says that this was particularly true compared to the Tigers and Panthers, which they had, and this is what ended up beating the Germans in the end with the Battle of the Bulge, trying to push their final blitzkrieg. They have a high consumption rate requiring very careful and specific maintenance, and they were too big and wide and heavy to cross bridges, so that limited its mobility in and around urban environments a lot of times. Whereas the Sherman tend to be narrower, not as heavy, and can fit into narrow areas like in urban environments, but still had the strength and the horsepower needed to push through like building walls and stuff and crush brush, so they can get through the battlefield swiftly and complete like more aggressive flanking maneuvers, which was very important when defeating German armor, because the German armor often was very heavy and thick on the fronts and sides. One of the things that played favorably well for the Shermans is its mobility. That helped improve its mobility was due to its power to weight ratio. There were several German reports that stated that the Sherman could climb slopes at angles thought to be impossible for many of the Panzers and Tigers, a lot of their tanks, which obviously hindered the Germans greatly, because the Shermans can get to higher ranges, and, well, I say ranges, higher levels, and be able to look down on the battlefield more effectively. Another thing that helped the Shermans become very effective in commanding and controlling the battlefield is their ability to be transported by rail, which obviously it didn't individually increase their mobility, but it did help them in the long run to be able to move quickly from one battlefield to the other and get to where they need strategically to be able to fight off the Germans. One thing that definitely hurt the EZ-8 and its mobility, and actually plagued most, if not all, the variants of Shermans, was their narrow track. This made it harder for them to get good ground pressure and spreading the weight of the tank through softer areas like mud and snow, which caused it to get stuck or slow down quite a bit. But that was easily overcome quickly after the development of the EZ-8, where they started doing what was called grousers or duck builds. These were basically just extensions built to attach to the track to give it a little more weight and a bigger footprint, so it was able to go through the softer soils easier without causing it to get bogged down, slowed down, or stuck. From what this article is saying, this was actually born to help the M4A3E8 Jumbo, which had a lot more weight compared to the EZ-8. And so once they obviously developed these duck bills for the EZ-8 or the Jumbo, they went ahead and started implementing it on the EZ-8, which gave it a little more oomph in its mobility on the battlefield. Up until this point, a lot of Sherman models used the very dated and weaker VVSS suspension system, which was open to a lot of criticism by its users and the allies that worked with the tank. This on top of the fact that a lot of the allies felt that the German Panther had a far more superior suspension in their refined torsion arm system, which gave the Panther a very smooth ride, making it easier for it to fire on the move, which is a big deal in tank combat, especially later in the war, and the Germans relying heavily on their blitzkrieg, and the Allies needed to be able to counter that as much as possible, which led the Allies to coming up with the solution known as in 1944 as the HVSS, which was the horizontal vaulting spring system. If I remember correctly, VVSS was the vertical volute spring system. I think I said vaulting, but it's volute, and I'm probably butchering that as it is. This change to the system improved the smoother ride and better weight distribution for the tank, which obviously helped stabilize the tank to make it more effective at firing on the move. I haven't found anything online yet, and I guess I probably should actually look into it. But according to War Thunder, anyway, the Sherman also had built-in stabilizers. So I'm assuming if it actually had the Easy 8, I should say, had built-in stabilizers. So I'm assuming if it had a built-in stabilizer with this new improved suspension system, and it made it a lot easier to keep that gun stabilized while they're trying to fire on the move, making it more effective against the German Panther specifically. Another thing that they looked to improve on the Easy 8, which was later actually improved even greater on the Jumbo, was the armor thickness. They went from a 76 to 89 millimeter, which is 3 to 3.5 inches, and then 108 or 4.25 inch, and finally then the 178, which is what was done on the Jumbo itself. This article doesn't specify what the Easy 8's armor thickness is. Maybe in the next video, actually no, in the next video I will look it up and provide the actual armor details to the Sherman. But or the Easy 8. So I'm going to lean towards the Easy 8 was more on the 108 millimeter side, and the Jumbo ended at the 178 millimeter. Now, an interesting fact about the Jumbos and Easy 8s, the Jumbos were usually used as the lead tanks because they were considered to be borderline shell-proof, and they spotted the enemy helping out with the armored divisions to conduct flanking maneuvers against the Germans to be able to, push them back, beat them, and obviously flank them. The Easy 8s and Fireflies hardly ever led a company or a division. And though the Jumbos led the companies and divisions more so than the Easy 8 or the British Firefly, the Easy 8 and Firefly were actually used to be called upon when enemies are spotted, so they can use their high velocity guns to be able to take out embedded targets or fast moving targets or just things behind cover a lot easier than the slower moving Jumbo's cannon. One of the things that the British and Canadians loved to do with their versions of the Easy 8 was to camouflage their 76.2 millimeter barrels to appear more like a 75 millimeter gun. So that way it would trick the enemy, because the enemy, obviously, when you're trying to defeat an armor column, you want to prioritize your targets and take out the more dangerous, threatening targets, and focus on the not so threatening after the scarier ones, if you will, were taken out. So the British and Canadians would try to do this camouflage to help make it less likely for the German anti-tank or anti-armor divisions to focus on their versions of the Sherman, the Easy 8, and hopefully give them more survivability and be able to combat the Germans' anti-tank divisions easier. Kind of jumping all over the place in the topics of this, the Sherman, but it's kind of still in line with what we've been talking about in this video so far is the armor value of the tank. One thing I like to know, I know in a previous video we talked about how Patton refused to allow his men to put sandbags onto their tanks because they did the sandbags thinking that it would help protect their tanks from the German rounds, but Patton did not like them because of what it did to the engine, causing it to overheat and fail. And apparently he did ask people to perform studies on different methods of improving the armor, specifically focusing on the sandbags themselves. And when he did had them do some systematic tests on the Sherman system with the added sandbags for armor, he found out that it proved that in few particular angles the shaped charges of a Panzerfaust failed to penetrate the armor, but it wasn't super effective as they were hoping it to be. But the practice stressed the chassis and overheated the engine quite often, so he didn't feel like the what little protection it did add to the crew, additional protection, was not worth the damage it was doing to the drivetrain and the engine of the Sherman. He would much rather have his mobility and strength and speed than have a tank that's going to be absolutely destroyed by having sandbags weigh it down and burn out its engine. So I cheated. Going back, I could not. Well, I was too lazy. I won't say I can't. I was too lazy to Google to see what the actual armor thickness of a Easy 8 was. So I just opened up and loaded up War Thunder, and I don't know how accurate War Thunder is. I think with the older tanks, they're fairly accurate because they're not really classified anymore. War Thunder said the highest armor it had was about 68 inches of thickness. That's not including the effective thickness that was increased by slopes. The gun mantlet that made the turret armor in the front about 108 millimeters of thickness. So I don't know what the article is referring to about who was getting the thicker armor. It seems like the Jumbo was getting that thicker armor. Then the Easy 8 didn't have as thick armor as a Sherman. The Jumbo seems like it had the standard armor thickness of any other Sherman variant that the Allies were using at the time. But that's going to about wrap it up for this video today. I'm sorry that it didn't get into more detail or it's found any like really cool stories to discuss about the Sherman. And I'm sorry if this video seemed all over the place, both with the building aspect of it and what I was talking about. I gotta try to get my videos more organized and sorted so I can keep track of what my builds are. Hopefully be more concise in the future. And if you guys did enjoy, please leave a like down below. If you're not, leave a thumbs down so I mean it helps me gauge of what I need to do improve. And feel free to leave a comment down below, especially if you got any really cool stories concerning the Easy 8. I'm sure you can find plenty of stories about Shermans, but I guarantee this is not going to be the only Sherman model kit I'll be doing anytime soon, and I don't want to use up all the stories and have nothing to talk about on this one video. But if you do find some really cool, unique stories that I may not know or be able to find easily, please let me know down below. Or if you got something you want me to discuss with the Sherman in general, and I'll be more than happy to do so. I really enjoy talking about these things. I love doing research on World War II equipment in general. But I hope you guys enjoy, like, subscribe, and look forward to a future video in about a week or two as I get ready to reorganize my model kit videos of the Sherman. Thanks again, and I hope you guys have a good day.